So in this video, I want to do a deep dive into a particular type of mass murder that, in my opinion, has been deliberately downplayed and obfuscated by the mass media. And not just the mass media, but other aspects of society as well, which is mass killings with an anti-white motive, like where specifically anti-white prejudice, racism, whatever was the motive. Now, of course, leftists and liberals will say, oh, anti-white racism is impossible. Racism requires privilege and power. It's like, okay, regardless of what word you want to use, anti-white racism, anti-white prejudice, whatever, yes, even by their definition, it would still be possible to have hatred or prejudice against white people and to kill white people based on these motives. And that has been the common underlying factor in these attacks. And they've happened over decades. And they've been very much memory hold to the point where people don't even know about them. And they definitely don't know that there's been enough of these types of killings that they're a trend. Now, I did a video on this in the past years ago, but that video I think was kind of shitty because I didn't really go into that much detail about it and I didn't provide sources. And there was a lot of other, I only listed a few examples. I've done more of a deep dive into it and there's way more instances of this than I realized. Essentially, the common denominator of these mass killings is they've all been by black males. In every single instance, a black male was the perpetrator. And they've all been motivated at least partially by hatred toward white people or feelings of being victimized by white people, essentially like resentment toward white people. And in these cases, whites were the primary target. Now, not all the victims were white, but the vast majority were. And it's clear that in all these cases, white people were the target and that race was a motivating factor. And these are also, all of them except for one are from the United States. I listed one example from outside the United States, but it's actually from Brazil. It was kind of an outlier though, but I thought this one was so prolific that I had to mention it because it's actually a case of a serial killer who had a very high number of victims. But yeah, aside from that one case, all of these are from the United States. I just simply haven't been able to find any similar examples from any other countries, but I mean, again, I didn't look at anything from South Africa. That's another instance because I excluded anything from South Africa or Zimbabwe because I think those countries, it's enough of a trend there that it should be kind of its own category, frankly. So I didn't want to look at anything from Southern Africa, like South Africa, Zimbabwe. I'm not sure if there's been anything like that from Namibia or Botswana or whatever, but I haven't looked at anything from Southern Africa. So it's specifically from the United States, but I also included one example from Brazil because it is so prolific that I felt I had to include it. Also, okay, in terms of like what is defined as an anti-white mass killing, I did not include anything that was specifically against police officers because in all the cases of violence directed by black men against police officers, A, the victims were not all white. B, it didn't seem like specifically white people were being targeted. It seemed like more broadly police were being targeted. C, I consider anti-police sentiments, in some ways they can overlap with anti-white sentiments, but I don't consider it one and the same issue because frankly, I do think police brutality is a real issue. I'm not justifying these killings. I'm definitely not justifying or condoning them, but I'm saying I do think police brutality is a real issue. And I think I'm not saying that all anti-white grievances are just completely made up, but I'm saying like, yeah, okay, like there might be some legitimate grievances these people have, but I'm saying it's a separate issue from police brutality. Like there's some overlap, but I don't see them as completely one and the same issue. So that's why I haven't included the specific instances targeting police officers. Like there was one in Dallas, in Baton Rouge, and there was the Chris Dorner killings. I have not included those incidents because I consider those kind of a separate modus operandi. But yes, anti-white mass killings, they're definitely numerous enough to be a trend, to be a category of mass killings, as are like, say, like Islamist mass murders, incel mass murders, generally like mentally ill mass murders, which I think is the vast majority, where it's just motivated by a general sense of mental illness. And also far right mass murders. So that would include like either white nationalist or more broadly far right mass murders. Like I would say these are all known categories of mass killings, but I would say anti-white mass killings might be the biggest type that is not broadly known. Like it's in terms of total number of victims, it's definitely not as high as Islamist mass murders. And again, I'm talking strictly in a United States context. Like not as high as Islamist, because 9/11 alone would dwarf everything else. Not, and again, I'm not talking about anything from like, you know, like a century ago or anything like that. I'm talking about basically the last 30 years, more or less. I'm including a few from a bit before then, but yeah, more or less like last 30, 40 years, give or take. So yeah, I mean, Islamists would probably be the biggest. Second biggest, I would guess, would probably be general mentally ill violence. Third might be far right. And then fourth would probably be these. Anti-white mass killings, and fifth would probably be specifically incels. Like I would consider incels a bit of a separate category from generally mentally ill violence, because I would say there's more of a motive. But I don't know, you could consider incels part of the far right umbrella, like incel violence basically being like Elliot Rodger and Alex Manassian being the two most prominent examples. But yeah, regardless of how you categorize it, my point is, okay, the anti-white mass killings is a big enough category that it should be considered its own category of mass killings. And these all fit a consistent pattern, more or less. Like there's a few of them that deviate slightly from it, but by and large, there's an identifiable pattern here, which is black men who are disgruntled and who feel upset with anti-white racism. With racism by white people, like against them. So like perceived anti-black racism, perceived victimization by whites, and then thus they themselves strike out against white people as their targets. In some cases, random white people, and in some cases, specific white people, but enough of them for it to be a mass killing or a serial killing. Now, in some cases, these actually fit the pattern more of serial killers rather than mass murderers, but those are the exception. Most cases, it fits more so the pattern of mass murders. A lot of these also overlap with like workplace violence, which I guess could be its own category, the disgruntled worker. Like just as like school shooters could be a category, workplace mass shooters or mass murderers could be its own category also. And a lot of them overlap with that. And there's actually a list from VDare that I used for some of these, because they have a list of essentially disgruntled black man workplace violence. But the thing is, in their list, not all of them were necessarily racially motivated. So I took from their list the ones that are racially motivated, but I also added several that are not on their list, either because they don't know about them, or in some cases it might be because it was more recently. VDare hasn't been in operation for several years, but their archives are still available. So I will link to their list in the description, along with a lot of citations for all these mass murders that I'm including. And they, as I said, they all racially motivated. That is a key common trait. I am not listing anything that's not racially motivated, where there's no evidence for racial motivation. I am not taking, a black man committed a mass murder in and of itself as being evidence of racial motivation. All these cases, there is documented evidence, which I have linked to, that they are racially motivated, that was a chief motivating factor. So before I get started, a few other caveats. I'm not including anything that like looks like it might be racially motivated, but where it hasn't been firmly established. Like say, for instance, the Wichita massacre in 2000. That was an especially heinous and brutal act of mass murder by several black men against a group of several white people. But it wasn't ever firmly established that race was a motivating factor. It could have been random. That being said, given the brutality of the crimes, I actually lean toward thinking, yes, race probably was a factor. But since it's not 100% proven, I haven't put it on the list, but I am going to mention it. I'm sure there's plenty of others like it, um, where race was likely a motivating factor. Also, there have been plenty of individual anti-white murders where race was a motivating factor. I haven't included those. I'm only talking about mass killings, so I'm including where essentially there was multiple victims. Like the lowest was one where there's 2 dead and 1 wounded, but in the vast majority it's significantly higher than that. So I'm not including individual attacks. As I said, I'm not including anything from Southern Africa, like South Africa or Zimbabwe, because I think that's its own issue, its own separate trend, like related but kind of separate, because I think it's a very different national context. As I said, it's specifically by black men. I'm not including Islamist terrorism. I think there's some overlap. Like Islamist terrorism can have anti-white undertones. Like, for instance, in Paris, how they targeted the Bataclan, the Eagles of Death Metal concert, which was definitely a band. It's not literally a death metal band. It's actually like some indie rock band. But they targeted a performance where I think they knew damn well that it would be predominantly white people. But nonetheless, I think Islamist terrorism has kind of a separate context, as I said, with police, mass killings directed at police officers. So I'm not including those either, like simply because it's a separate context. Yeah, also I should mention these killings, they span from, I think, 1987 is the earliest to, I think it was the early 2020s, the newest one. And there was actually a lull in these killings between 1997 and 2007, which I find very interesting. And it kind of makes sense, as this time period saw what, in my opinion, was the most stable period in white-black race relations in modern American history. Like, this was the pre-Obama era. This was basically the late Clinton era and the Bush era. And I think white-black race relations were actually kind of stable at the time, relatively speaking. It was after the LA riots, but before Obama. And I think there was just a bit of a lull where black-white race relations weren't in the spotlight, and Islamist terrorism and the Middle Eastern wars were instead in the spotlight. And I think it kind of, yeah, there was a bit of a lull in racial tension between blacks and whites at the time. Aside from Hurricane Katrina and Kanye West saying George Bush don't care about black people, ironic considering Kanye West and the direction he's gone more recently. But yeah, despite that, that was kind of just a blip in the radar. Like, I would say overall during that time period, like I remember growing up in that time period, race relations felt more stable than they ever had been, like reading about the history beforehand. And they're more stable also than afterward as well, because I think Obama and Black Lives Matter inflamed racial tensions quite a bit. Like, and I think it started really with the Trayvon Martin killing, which I believe was 2013. But yeah, even earlier than that though, like these mass killings did start again around 2007. So that was around when Obama was elected. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting how there was essentially a 10-year lull. And in my opinion, it's partly because people were just more focused on Islamist terrorism than they were on white-black racial issues. Also on like Columbine and other copycat killings. I mean, is that the reason for the lull? That people were focused on other issues and that racial tensions weren't as severe? I don't know, but that's my personal guess. There could be other factors as well. So anyway, yeah, without further ado, I'm going to start listing the actual incidents now. So the first of these was the 2020 Milwaukee Brewery shooting. So that was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A disgruntled worker. It was an employee or former employee. His name was Anthony Farrell. He said he was an alleged victim of racism, and he targeted his place of employment. I'm not sure, was it current employment or former? But he had 5 victims. They were all white men. Every single one of them was a white man. And yeah, he was a current employee of the who worked there at the brewery, I think as an electrician, and he killed himself also. So that's interesting. Like, some of these shootings fit the pattern of like murder suicide. In this case, yes, it does fit that pattern. So yeah, 5 deaths, all of which were white men. And he stated that he believed he was a victim of racism. Like apparently there was an incident where they hung a noose at his locker or something like that in the past. So he felt like he was a victim of racism and thus took it out on his coworkers and yeah, murdered 5 of them, all white men. Yeah, it was just shooting, mass shooting. So that was 2020. That was the most recent that I'm aware of. But the thing is, it's been harder to find recent information about these because VDare did compile a lot of this, but they're no longer active. So yeah, but the issue is they kind of mixed up the ones that are racially motivated with ones that are not clearly motivated by race. So that's why I'm making this list in particular. Oh, and when I'm counting for all these, the number of deaths, I'm not counting the shooter himself among the dead. I'm only counting the other victims. So yeah, 2000. The next one, 2017 Fresno shooting in Fresno, California. So this was a mass shooting by Corey Ali Muhammad, who was a black man. I'm guessing Muslim by his name, and his motive was anti-white hatred. There were 3 people who he killed in this mass shooting, all white men. He also killed a security guard several days earlier, and the security guard, interestingly, one source claimed that the security guard was white, but then I saw an image from a different source that made him look like probably a black man. So I'm not sure about that, but either way, in the mass shooting, racism was deemed as a motivating a motive behind it. Like he again claimed that he hated white people and he targeted white men specifically, and I guess he also killed this black, I guess, security guard a few days earlier for some reason. But yeah, now the next one has a bit of a different modus operandi. This was more of a serial killer rather than a mass murderer. Like it wasn't one single instance. This was the 2016/2017 Kansas City hiking trail serial killer in Kansas City, Missouri, and he targeted white people specifically on hiking trails. That one hits a bit close to home because I like hiking a lot on trails. But yeah, his name was Frederick Desmond Scott. Sorry, Demond Scott. Again, a black man. These are all black men, every single one of these. Motive was anti-white hatred, and there were 6 victims, all white, 5 white men, 1 white woman. Now this, again, it's different from most of the others because it fits the pattern of a serial killer rather than a mass murderer who is killing people in a single instance. This was over an extended period of time, killing them one by one, so a serial killer. Interestingly, there's no Wikipedia article on this one, as there are for the other cases. Is it because it's a serial killer rather than a mass murderer? They're more likely to have a Wikipedia article if it's a mass murderer than a serial killer? I'm not sure. At least one of the deaths involved gunshot wounds, but they don't seem to all be shootings. So that's something that differentiates it again, like the method of killing from the others listed here. Most of them are mass shootings. Now, this next one I think is a bit more well known. It was in 2015 in Virginia, and it was an on-camera shooting that was recorded live in Moneta, Virginia. And the perpetrator, his name is Vesterly Flanagan 2, aka Bryce Williams. What? How does he have 2 names that are totally different? I don't know. But anyway, his motive was workplace disgruntlement and that he was a perceived victim of racism. And he worked with these news reporters. So it was 2 I believe 2 news reporters were murdered on camera by him live, both white. A white man and a white woman both killed. And also there was a white woman they were interviewing who was wounded but not killed in this shooting. So yeah, this one, there was a lot of publicity on it because it occurred live on camera. I think the image of the woman, her shocked face, kind of became a bit of a meme. Like it was widely spread. It's an image some people might be familiar with if they saw it. So yeah, that was in 2015. The next one was in 2010. It was the 2010 Hartford Distributors shooting in Hartford, Connecticut. A black man perpetrator named Omar Thornton. Not sure if he was Muslim. Like Omar sounds like a Muslim name, but Thornton does not sound like a Muslim last name. Some Hispanics have the name Omar also, interestingly enough, like Spanish or Hispanic. But yeah, I'm not sure what exactly was going on there with his name. But yeah, workplace disgruntlement and perceived that he was a perceived victim of racism. Those were his motives. And his victims, there were 8 deaths and 2 injuries. All of the dead were white men. I am not sure about the 2 injured. I haven't been able to find out about that. But all 8 of the victims who died were white men. And he perceived them as having been racist toward him, and that was his motive. Okay, so the next one, 2008, Kirkwood City Council shooting in Kirkwood, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. The perpetrator's name is Charles Lee Thornton, nicknamed Cookie. So Charles Lee Cookie Thornton. His motive was perceived anti-black racism by whites and personal issues that he had with the city council. So there were 6 dead, 5 white men and 1 white woman, and 1 person wounded. I'm not sure about the racial background of the person wounded. 2 of the white males who were dead were police officers, but this shooting did not seem to be specifically anti-police, but more broadly a reaction to perceived racism. So I would not categorize this as an anti-police shooting specifically, even though 2 of the victims were police officers. I would categorize this more broadly as an anti-white shooting. Okay, so this next one is a bit of an exception. I'm including it anyway, even though it's the only non-American example, but it's so bizarre and it's so prolific that I feel like I have to mention it. So it's between 2005 and 2014. It was a serial killer from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. His name is Celson Jose das Graças, a black man, and his motive was that he wanted to kill white women specifically. He had 42 victims. 38 of them were women. 1 of them was a toddler, a girl. 3 of them were men. Now, it's uncertain if all the victims were white, but he said repeatedly that he wanted to kill white women. Like, that was his motive. Now, interestingly, this is the only non-US example I've listed here. I don't know if there's been more cases like this from Brazil. I only know about this because it was just very prolific, but it wasn't publicized that much in Western countries. And again, it's different from most of these cases, except for the one Kansas City case, because he was a serial killer and not a mass murderer who killed people in a single instance. It was over a period of 10 years, and he mostly killed them by stabbing and strangulation as opposed to shooting. I'm not sure if he shot any. Now, interestingly, there's no Wikipedia page for this, just like the other serial killer incident in Kansas City, whereas there are Wikipedia pages for all the mass killings I've mentioned here. So is it that serial killers are less likely to have Wikipedia pages than mass killers who kill people all at once? I am not sure, but I guess that seems to be the case. So again, going back reverse chronologically, the next one is 1996. So as I mentioned, there was a lull. Actually, in the United States, if I look here, yeah, I mean, the Brazil serial killer did occur during the period of the lull, but in the lull, in the United States specifically, as I mentioned, there was a lull between 1997 and 2007 where there didn't appear to be any killers, any mass murderers or serial killers in the U.S. of this specific nature that I'm aware of. So, yeah, the next one, reverse chronologically, is 1996. It was a Florida mass shooting of coworkers. So again, another disgruntled former coworker. This was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was by Clifton McCree, again, a black man, as with all these cases. His motive was alleged racism by white former coworkers. His victims, 5 dead, all of them were white, 1 wounded who is also white. Now, this, interestingly, doesn't have a Wikipedia page. It's the only mass killing listed here, like as opposed to serial killing, to not have a Wikipedia page. I'm not sure why. The next one's the 1993 Long Island Railroad shooting in Garden City Park, New York, on Long Island. Perpetrator's named Colin Ferguson, again, black man. His motive was anti-white and anti-Asian hatred. So he also hated Asians. I guess that's a bit of a combo breaker here. That he was a perceived victim of discrimination and he was mentally ill. He had 6 victims, 3 of which were white men, 1 was a white woman, and 2 were Asian women. 21 injured, and allegedly none of the 21 injured were black. So I'm not sure about that one, but I've seen in some of these sources claims of that none of them were black, but I'm not sure exactly the racial makeup of them. So the final instance that on this list is the 1987. So this is the only one that's like during the Cold War, like pre fall of the Berlin Wall and fall of communism. So it's getting into a bit of a different era here. But yeah, 1987 Pacific Southwest Airlines flight 1771 hijacking. The plane took off from Los Angeles. And the perpetrator, his name was David Burke, black man. Motive, perceived racism, and he was also a disgruntled former employee of the airline. So again, in many of these cases, it's a disgruntled current or former employee. That seems to be a pattern here as well, with probably most, but not all, of these cases. His victims were 42 dead. So he crashed the plane with no survivors. And crashing this plane with no survivors. So yeah, I'm not certain as to the races of the victims, but he did cite perceived racism by the airline as one of his motives. And he also shot some people on board before crashing the plane. Perhaps he's wondering why you would shoot a man before crashing this plane with no survivors. Yeah, like definitely some Bane posting elements to this shooting. But yeah, that's what he did. And yeah, so that's the final instance of that on this list. Shit, it don't matter who we are. What matters is our plan, motherfucker. I am white people's reckoning. It would be very painful for your white ass. Yeah, so I guess David Burke was a big guy. Actually, I'm not sure if he was actually a big guy. But yeah, so yeah, that was the final case. I mean, frankly, it happened long enough ago that I think it's not in bad taste for me to make Bane posting jokes about it. Yeah, as if I don't make jokes about more recent shit. But yeah, fair enough. But yeah, I mean, so those are the instances of anti-white mass killings and serial killings that have been motivated by anti-white hatred or, you know, perceived victimization by whites. So basically where white people were the entire or primary target, or where hatred against white people or perceived victimization by white people was a main motivating factor. And again, these are all black men, like every single one of these instances. So it's clearly a pattern. So when looking at this list, there's 10 in total that I looked at, but 9 of them in the United States specifically. And of those 5 out of 9 involved a current or former worker, essentially a disgruntled worker, targeting his current or former workplace. So that does seem to be a frequent modus operandi of these types of anti-white killings, killings where white people are targeted by black men. A lot of them seem to be workplace related, but not all. So like 5 out of 9 out of the American ones. So I don't know. Are these 2 separate types of killings? Maybe. Like, again, there's always overlaps, right? So you could there's clearly an overlap between disgruntled workplace mass killings and anti-white mass killings. Like, there's clearly a big overlap in this Venn diagram, but it's not total, because there were 4, one of which was a serial killer, which some people would say is a different type of thing. But then, 3 anti-white mass killings and 1 serial killer that were not also disgruntled workplace killings. So it's clearly enough for it to be a pattern outside of that as well. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking at these, but moreover, like it does feel like it's been memory hold a lot. Like I asked AI about this, and the AI said, like, I think it was the Google AI, was like, oh, there haven't been any anti-white mass murders in the United States in the last 30, 40 years. It's like, yes, there have been, or murders where by, I think I might have said like murders by targeting white people by non-white perpetrators. They're like, oh no, no such thing has happened. But it's like, yes, it has happened. And the fact that the AI thought it hadn't happened proves that this has been thoroughly memory holed. Like a lot of the people, the powers that be, don't want people to realize that this is a trend because they feel like, oh, it'll make white people more racist, it'll whatever. Now, granted, yes, the current administration, the Trump administration, has kind of pandered to, white racial grievances. Like they've made posts and stuff talking about mass deporting non-whites and things like that, like all non-whites. Like, so they're willing to pander to it, but I don't know. Is it that they're not willing to talk about this, or maybe that because it happened before the current administration, they consider it old news? I don't know. But either way, like regardless of the current exact racial climate in the United States, which is frankly fairly confusing because like political correctness and anti-whiteness do still exist, but then there's also this like Trumpian like veneer of pro-whiteness, but without really actually doing anything um to create a society where that is like explicitly for white people. So basically, like, I don't know, this like fluctuating between alleged pro-whiteness but also being civic nationalist. Yeah. But my point is, regardless of the current context of the United States, like, and regardless of, even if this, who knows, maybe these killings will be a thing of the past, maybe they won't. My point, like the most recent one I could find was 2020, so that was during the big event. Actually, wait, that's not true. It was in February 2020, so it was before the restrictions were implemented, interestingly enough. So yeah, all these, as far as I know, were pre-big event. So I'm not sure if there've been any more recently. Like again, like I don't have VDare. I got most of these from the VDare page that I'll link to, but there are some of them that weren't listed there that I knew about just from reading about it over the years, like from various sources, like on social media or far right websites or whatever. Now, have there been any more recently? I don't know. And please, if you know about any, either more recently or in the other years I covered, please let me know if there's any that I've forgotten. But yeah, I think this is important that people know about this because it has been deliberately memory hold. There's this idea that like, oh, there's no such thing as anti-white mass murders or serial killings in the United States. It's never happened, but it's like, yes, it has happened. Where whether correctly or not, these perpetrators have seen themselves as victims of racism. Again, I'm not claiming that they're necessarily right or wrong here in perceiving themselves as victims of racism. Maybe they are, maybe they have a point in some cases, maybe they don't. But I'm saying, regardless of whether or not they were actually victims of racism, they engaged in these mass killings and serial killings against white people, predominantly against white people. And again, obviously, like I even if they were actual victims of racism, it does not justify what they did. Like it's horrific. I'm just pointing out the fact that, again, I'm not passing judgment as to whether or not their claims, like some of these, not all of these, not all of them actually claim to be a victim of racism. Some of them just said they hated white people. But I'm just saying, of those who claim to be victims of racism, I am not passing judgment as to whether or not these claims are true. In some cases, they seem to have more evidence than others, like the Milwaukee guy where there was the noose. Again, he could have been making that up. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the exact details of these natures. But I'm just saying, like, okay, regardless of whether or not these men were actual victims of racism, that was a motivating factor that they cited as their reasoning for why they engaged in these acts of murder. So yeah, I hope you all found this informative, and this is something that really needs to be documented better. Not just by me. Like, this video shouldn't be the best source of documentation on this, nor should the VDare article, because both of these are things that could get taken down. So there really needs to be more documentation of this by more people, and more awareness of this, frankly, so it can't be memory hold, and so people can't act like this is something that never happened. Like, yeah, a lot of leftists and liberals might argue that, like, oh, the number of victims in total was like, well, if you add it all up, not counting the one from Brazil, but all the ones from the United States, it's 83 victims in total. And just over half, 42, were from the 1987 plane hijacking. And to be fair, that was the oldest of all these instances. Like, that happened the longest ago. So that would be 41, not counting that incident, and then 83 altogether. And again, I'm only talking deaths right now, not wounded. Now, if you only count the more recent ones, so the ones from like 2007 and afterward, after the lull, the 10-year lull, it would be 30 victims in total. And if you're going to discount the Kansas City serial killer because he was a serial killer and not a mass murderer, it would be 24. So from the most absolutely strict definition, like only counting mass killings, only counting the more recent ones, so not counting the serial killer, and only counting like 2007 and afterward, it would be 24 deaths in total. Like, obviously not counting the perpetrators, like 24 victims who were killed. So, I mean, and then more broadly, if you're going to count the serial killer from Kansas City also, and you're going to count the older ones, like from the 90s and the late 80s, it would get as high as 83 victims. Most of them being from the single airplane hijacking from 1987. And again, none of this is including the one that I mentioned from Brazil. I just kind of mentioned that as an outlier, as like, yeah, it doesn't really count to the total I'm mentioning here. I just mentioned that because it was so prolific, I felt I had to mention it. But yeah, just looking at the ones from the United States, like, those are the numbers. So, like, my point is, yeah, okay, if you're going to say, like, if you're only looking at the ones that are more recent and that are mass killings, it's 24 victims in total. And it's like, okay, that wouldn't be nearly as high as the number of victims of, like, far right attacks, like, in the United States. I don't think so, like, if you add those up. Or other categories of mass killings that I mentioned. But nonetheless, it's still, like, the number of attacks and the number of victims is enough to clearly establish this as a pattern. And again, it's like it's clearly, there have been enough instances of this sort that it's not nothing. And again, like, I mean, the 24 number, that's by the strictest definition possible. Like, I'm not, that's not including the Kansas City one because he's a serial killer, as opposed to a mass murder. And then it's also not including the other ones in the 90s or 2000s, or sorry, 90s or late 80s, because it's just too long ago. But I don't know. I mean, where do you draw the line, right? Like, in terms of, like, what's relevant now, it's like, is a mass killing from the 90s, like Columbine was from the 90s, that's still considered relevant. I mean, 9/11 was 2001. That was a while ago. That's still considered relevant. So it's like, what's still considered relevant? Where do you draw the line? I don't know. But yeah, if you include all these, it's 83 victims, half of which were from one single attack in 1987. So it's like, yeah, fair enough. Like, it is a long-standing trend. And again, I don't know anything about, like, if there were attacks like these. I think there were some anti-white killings in, like, the 60s or 70s, but again, I don't know as much going back that far. Like, I think there was something that was called the zebra killings or something like that. I'm not sure about the exact nature of it, but I'd have to do more research into that. But yeah, that was I think in the 70s or 60s or something like that, so that was much longer time ago. So yeah, I mean, hopefully this will help people be aware of this, like, so it won't be totally memory hold, because I think it does put a lot of the discourse around mass killings and racial conflict in a different context when people are aware of this as something that has been an ongoing trend over the decades.